Welcome to the World Repair Shop's weekly recap. I'm Meta Spencer in Toronto, Canada, and I'm coming to you from Project Save the World's YouTube channel, where we have activists from every country as visitors, as guests, people who are working to repair the world and save us from 6 global threats: war and weapons, global warming, famine, pandemics, radioactive contamination, and cyber risks. Every weekday, but not on weekends, I chat during my noon hour with one or more of the marvelous people who are working to save us from these threats. And we broadcast our conversations live on our To Save the World 24/7 channel. Um, at other times, when we're not live, you'll see there a continuous stream of previously recorded shows of conversations I'd had before about global issues. Then, at the end of each week, I am compiling clips from recent live shows to make a single 1 hour long recap, which we put online generally Monday evenings at 8 p.m. for permanent viewing on our website, tosavetheworld.ca, as well as on YouTube and Facebook. Now, this particular recap will feature clips from various weekly conversations that I've had with my dear friend Ann Swidler, who was in Berkeley, California at the time, Kuzma Tarasov, who was in Ottawa, Joseph Sampaya, who was in Burundi, and Stephen Staples here in Toronto. Ann Swidler is a professor of sociology at the University of California, Berkeley. And she goes to Africa whenever she can, and there's no pandemic going, to work on, or she has worked a lot on HIV in Africa. She's a specialist in culture relations. And so she's now working on understanding how non-governmental organizations work effectively
of the coronavirus. NGOs.
Okay.
Yeah, I had been studying those, and I had concluded that they kept coming in trying to transform the lives of local people without any lasting result. And so, they would come in, they would do their projects, they would try to create a democratically elected committee to govern a village or to decide on women's rights or something. And then the minute their money went away, everything they had been trying to accomplish also went away. And what I noticed is that the institutions that sustained themselves in the lives of regular people were religious congregations, and there people gave their own money in order to keep their religious congregations going and were hugely affected by the authority of their pastors or sheikhs, leaders of those congregations, and by chiefs who also have very few legal powers, but have decisive social powers in their own villages. So I started trying to understand their authority and how that works, and why those institutions sustain themselves, and the kinds of institutions that we right-hearted liberals try to sort of import don't sustain themselves.
Are you saying that these are people who support their own activities? It's not foreign aid?
Yes.
Wow.
Right.
Well, that's
Exactly.
a pretty serious indictment of foreign aid, isn't it?
Wait a minute. For example, Western-funded aid organizations, including Canadian organizations, they dig boreholes, for example. Canadians really care about clean water, which is a very high priority, and they do a lot of development work. The global community, the wealthy nations, pay for basically almost 100% of the HIV drugs given in Africa, which are keeping millions of people alive. So the idea that foreign aid is no good is, I would object completely to that. The increases in longevity, that they're just the infrastructure, the healthcare, the is all dependent on foreign aid. So I don't think I would critique foreign aid, but I do think that the kind of fantasy that Western ordinary people like you and me might have, which is what African countries really need, is someone to come in and teach gender equality in the villages, teach men to cook with their wives, come in and tell local, have villagers form an NGO to do HIV prevention work, have an NGO come in and teach villagers how to have a democratic form of governance. I think almost every study, it's not just my research, it's every study of such interventions shows they do not work. They do not take hold locally, and they do not become important local sources of political and social effective capacity. They just don't increase the capacity of people to get things they need or want. So they appreciate the money, that's for sure. If you do a training on preventing intimate partner violence, that's a typical kind of thing they do. Everyone wants to come and do the training because they get a little per diem as part of the training, and they might get lunch, which there is no small matter. That is to get chicken for people who can't afford to eat meat in any form, basically ever. These are huge benefits and they love them, but does it actually change ways of life, beliefs, the way people operate on the ground? And I would say the answer is no.
Well, okay. What's your next move? You want to shut these things down?
My next move is, Mette, I think here I would say you're concerned with us. Like, what's the next move? What should we do? What should we do? What should we do? I'm actually interested in saying, before we think about what we do, we should really understand how they operate. What is going on? How do local institutions actually function? What is it that pastors and sheikhs are doing? What is it that chiefs are doing? What are they not my stereotype, oh, the chiefs are all men, so that's bad. But why are they such central figures? So I guess my first thing would be, if you want to intervene, it's sort of like if you want to cure disease in a body, but you don't know anything about physiology. You've never studied the circulatory system. You don't know what the lungs are. You don't know what the heart does. Then you say, oh my God, this person's ill. We should take out the heart. That'll be good. That must improve things. The person's blood is too hot. That's what's wrong, and let's just take out the heart. Well, I think our approach to foreign aid is a little bit like that, which is we don't see that it's incumbent on us to actually understand the systems we're so confident we have a right to change.
Okay, I'm willing to understand. Now, the problem is, what is it that if I understood, I would want to do? I mean, I am so much a policy-oriented person. I have to decide for myself how I'm going to fix the world. And that's all I do day and night, is try to fix the world. And I certainly want to know how to do it right. But don't tell me don't do anything, because I can't do that.
I guess I would say, well, then that's your problem. I would say you can't do that. But I would say, before you start trying to fix parts of the world that are very, very different from your world,
okay,
it is incumbent on you to understand them.
I definitely want to understand, and
well, so let's say,
okay,
for instance, there is this sort of growing school in development studies that it's got different names, but developmental patrimonialism or something, that says something like, it's better to work with the kinds of institutions that already exist on the ground and work sort of within their structures encouraging them to evolve in fruitful directions rather than trying to displace them.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, that's
So
good.
instead of
That's the
imagining
kind
that
of
we're gonna-
advice I could absorb. I'm not in a position to do much with it, but I can listen to that. And now if I okay, now with that maxim, how would that could you advise anybody in particular about how they should change some practice they're actually doing?
Well, again, since I'm an academic and I study things rather, so I'm not an activist, I'm an academic. So I don't spend my time trying to change the things I'm studying. I try to understand them. But I would say that you could ask a question like, are chiefs, for example, more effective in what they're trying to do, which is get clean water for their communities, repair the local roads so that their villagers can get to and from the market, enforce what we would call property rights, which are critical to the daily lives. I mean, if somebody steals someone's goat, or in the chief's court I went to last time I was in Malawi in 2019, an old woman's dog had eaten a man's goat, and he only had 2 goats. So, this was a pretty serious threat to his livelihood. And it's the chief's authority. The chief hears this in court and adjudicates and gets the woman to explain why she can't keep her dog under control and so forth. But if you wanted to transform people's lives, one thing is you would want to preserve their access to effective legal protections. And you would want to be very careful, for example, so right now, there are attempts to privatize landholding because you have these communal lands and people farm them, but the chief gets to decide who farms which piece of land. And so no wonder the chiefs have a lot of power. And it means that, well, the theory behind it, which is a good one, I think, is that if one family has very few children, few offspring, they don't need as much land, and another family has more offspring and needs more land, they get more. But so he can kind of reallocate within certain traditionally understood limits. If you come and you have a land law that privatizes all the land, first of all, there are almost certainly huge abuses. But the second thing is, wait a minute, if you undermine all the powers of the chief, where would people get their basic access to some kind of judicial system? Where would they get somebody to prevent the local teenager from stealing the sweet potatoes out of their garden, which is what they eat? I mean, a garden isn't a decorative thing, it's your farm, basically. So I think in all these ways, you want to think both when you're making changes. We don't have modern institutions to replace, effective modern institutions to replace these existing local institutions. So I think you want to tread carefully before you go altering ways of life. And then I think you do want to think about how some kinds of interventions work with local patterns. I'll give you a positive example. When I got to know one chief very well, I met him originally, I guess, in 2018, and he's great.
Are these hereditary, or how does a person become a chief?
They're hereditary, but there is a lot of negotiation within the ruling lineage about which particular individual will actually become the chief. And sometimes it's a woman. It's less common, but it can happen. And they often are kin. So there's a whole hierarchy of chiefs, and the local headman, the one who actually runs the village, is often part of the larger kin group of the higher order group village headman, who might be part of the kin group of the highest level. They're called traditional authorities. But I wanted to give you a positive example. I was talking with him And I think he's a very good chief. If you met him, he's a tremendously sympathetic figure, I'll just say. Badly physically disabled from childhood, chosen, I think, for his kind of wisdom. And, if you ask, why did this person who can barely drag himself from one place to another on a single crutch and has to be lifted, to use the toilet, his wife has to put him on the they don't have toilets, but, they have pit latrines. Anyway, how did he become a chief? I think he really is very public spirited. And I was asking him about his village, and he explained that the best thing that had happened were these village savings and loans. And these were originally sponsored by NGOs. They are local sort of mutual savings associations. And they don't require outside funding now. Once they were promoted and became common, people use them for everything. And it's basically a forced savings. So you come, and the local pressure that all these people are your relatives, and the chief enforces rules, means that if you put in the equivalent of 20 cents every week, and then in 6 months you get to take out the equivalent of $20 and start a small business, that can really transform your life. So that's a kind of intervention that can work, and it's because it works with what are already local patterns, which is people are highly mutually dependent. They do a lot of petty trading. So there are opportunities for somebody, once they have a little bit of capital, they can buy a bushel of tomatoes and then sell it as little groups of 4 tomatoes on their front. They make a little thing out of sticks, a kind of a platform. And then as people walk by on the village path, they sell these little groups of tomatoes. And that can generate income that can stimulate growth in a whole village.
Now let's talk to Kuzma Tarasov. Kuzma is in Ottawa, and he has been writing for maybe his whole lifetime about the religious community or spiritual community of pacifists that he has been brought up in. So I want to talk to him about the history of the Doukhobor movement. I know that you are a community of Russians who came to Canada. I believe I heard that your way was partly paid by Tolstoy on the basis of proceeds from some of his writings. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. He wrote Resurrection there at the end, and used the money to finance much of the transportation to Canada. In 1899, there were 7,500 Doukhobors that came over at that time. It's the largest immigration to Canada of one group at one time. From the Caucasus, from Transcaucasia. Like my grandfather was born in Kars, and it was part of Russia at the time, and then it became back to Turkey. And he was one of those that came to Canada. My mother came from Elizaveta-Pol, which is one of the other areas in the Caucasus, Azerbaijan today.
I don't even know the origins of the Doukhobor community. What's the beginning of the faith? Did it begin in Russia, or was it imported from other parts of Europe? Where did it all start?
The roots began with kind of the time of the big changes in Russia with the church in the 1600s, and there was they call it the big split, and the Doukhobors were part kind of in the left wing of that. The left wing would be those that didn't want to have anything to do with the clerical or the church authorities, and those on the right wanted to have more rituals for the church. But here they were kind of they weren't called Doukhobors then. They were just people that were against the church, and they were looked upon as really dissidents.
Kind of heretics. Were they within the
heretics?
Russian? A Russian Orthodox.
Russian Orthodox Church.
They were themselves originally in there, and then they kind of split away, right? Mhm.
That right. Higher clerics of the church said, well, these people, they wrestle against the church, and therefore they are spirit wrestlers. They go against everything. But the Doukhobors, or this group of people living in the Caucasus at that time, in the kind of Ukraine, Sochi area, in the middle of southern part of Russia, said, no, we are wrestling with the spirit of truth and love. We're not wrestling against the spirit. And so the name used in derision to begin with was picked up by the Doukhobors themselves, by these proto-Doukhobors.
Do you mean that
and the name became Dukhoborets, means Dukh, spirit. Borets means a wrestler. So Dukhoborets, spirit wrestler. At that time, they settled in the southern part of Russia. The Tsar at the time said, well, look, these people are being persecuted. They're being, this is Alexander the First.
You mean the Tsar excuse me, but the Tsar himself took up defending them or arguing on their behalf?
Yeah, well, he was concerned because these were these are citizens of the country. And he noticed a number of them were being exiled to the north, to Finland, and to northern Russia, to Siberia, and so on. And he said, well, look, maybe we should consolidate them together so they don't proselytize anywhere else. And so he gave an order in the Milky Waters region. This is the area where the Mennonites were at the time, near the Sochi area of the Crimea, in that area. And so here was a settlement that began and prospered, and according to the rules, nobody was to attack them, nor were they to proselytize. So they were sociologically, in the first time that they were brought together, everything was theirs. So, it was Catherine the Great that brought in the Mennonites to help with the raising of the technology of agriculture and so on.
From
so
Germany?
They were there.
From Germany?
From Germany, right.
Uh-huh.
And the Doukhobors, this happened to be an area where the Doukhobors settled right nearby. And they set up their Sabrania gatherings, which is the gathering of people. They had a community home, and they owned things in common, and became, quite prosperous in the sense that they worked. And then the next czar, or there was pressure from the church, and said, well, look, these people are becoming very very good in a sense. They're instead of being isolated and being dispersed or dying and so on, they are prospering. So there was pressure to do something, and so there was
let them get away with being too successful, or they might undermine the faith. Is that it?
Exactly. So by 1841, they were exiled to the Caucasus. They had to walk and go by cart and so on. Again, they were. Why did they choose the Caucasus? Because it was kind of the border areas of the Russian Empire. They needed some security there, in a sense. They needed settled people there. And this was the area of the Tatars and marauding peoples and so on. It was an unsettled area. And here, a pacifist group, they were against killing. And they thought, well, this is a great place for them to be exiled. They'll be wiped out.
Now, I've heard of another landmark event that there was and I don't know anything about the history of it, there was a time when the Doukhobors got all their weapons together and burned them. Is that right? Tell me about that.
Yes,
Where
that's
were
the
they?
central part. I would say that's the central part of the Doukhobors. That was in 1895. It is called the Burning of Arms. Could you imagine? This was 1895. This is not 2000. 7,000 Doukhobors in 3 areas of Russia burnt their guns on June 28, on the evening of June 28, 29th, 1895. And it was done in a sense in a secret, but this, they were like a couple of 100 kilometers away from each other. And it was a public protest against militarism and war. And it was instigated by the Doukhobor leader by Tolstoy, in a sense, because the leader was in exile, that's Peter V. Verigan, but he was reading Tolstoyan materials and, in a sense, plagiarizing some of the writings as his own, but they were really Tolstoyan writings, because Tolstoy was anti-war, of course. He wanted to create a world that people cared for each other. It was really an international stalwart leader in the world, in a sense. He was in contact with people all over the world, including North America, and was in contact about 15 languages. He was a phenomenal individual, and it was him eventually who helped him. But going back to the 1895 event, this burning of arms, which is called also Peter's Day, because it happens to be on the day of the leader's name, Peter Verigan, but essentially it is St. Peter's Day. And essentially, it's a peace day. I like to call it a peace day, and it's commemorated each year in Canada by the Doukhobors because it's such a big event in their life. It's looking at the big ideas in society, and in a sense, that 1895 event was a turning point from being more sectarian to being a social movement, because it was a breakaway from their roots and making almost a political statement to the world. We want to create a new world order, in a sense.
Well, now,
But
were
going
they,
back to
was the
Yep.
idea that they were going to reach out to other faiths or people who were non-Doukhobors and recruit people to pacifism in general? Or was it, how did it all happen? And what
Well,
did it mean to them?
they weren't, in a sense, people say they're religious groups, but they're in a sense not formal religion at all. I mean, most of them never looked at the Bible or anything, because they felt the living word is the word that's printed is the dead word, and we need to have a direct relationship with the source. And to them,
Sort of a mystical
they felt
group? A spiritually a mystical spiritual.
Yeah, well, they felt that there's a divine element in each of us. Therefore, it is wrong to kill another human being. And so they looked upon this, as beauty, love, compassion. You could call it God or whatever. But this is something that was in each person that should be preserved as a sacred duty in the world. And so, they were in essence, most of them were illiterate, but through the guidance of the leader and Tolstoy especially, they embraced this new way of life as something that's needed in the world, that it's time for people to cease having wars. And so that's why it's a big mark. It's on their psyche in 1895, and to me I consider it is the main thrust of their mission in North America, in the world.
Okay, that's absolutely wonderful. I wonder, to what extent is that a characteristic of the Doukhobors now? That is to say, are they more a spiritual movement that, or is there more formal church going and ritual and stuff that we would normally regard as the trappings of a religious community?
Well, I'm writing a book right now that's coming out any day, which is a continuation of my big book, The Spirit Wrestlers. That I don't know whether you've seen it or not. This was in 2002.
In your books, are you writing mostly about the Canadian Doukhobors or the Doukhobors before they came to Canada?
Both. Both, yeah. And in fact, the book that I'm just writing now is from 3 continents. It's from Russia, Canada, and Australia.
Let's go to Burundi. I've never been to Burundi, but we're going to have a conversation with Joseph Simpaya, who's a pastor who travels around Africa, East Africa, and does his ministerial work. He lives in, I guess, Finland now, but his home is in Africa, and he helps organize faith-based NGOs working on various kinds of development issues. And we're going to talk about African agriculture. And I have been recently told that the most effective people doing development work in Africa are the ministers, the people, the religious leaders. You're doing well.
Reverend Joseph Simpaya, and I based in Finland, but operating some project community development in East Africa, in Burundi and Tanzania. We just working with local community development in different sectors. Also, we work with youth, universities, and colleges through computer science technology, which at the moment we have not yet got a sponsor or investors in that sector. We also do our best to train the local churches leaders from different denominations, churches, ministries, and we have about 1,600 people who are joined. So now I just traveled from Finland to East Africa and Burundi. Now I based in one city called Ngozi, the 3rd city of the country. Burundi has 12 million of population, and this city has around 465,000 population.
And
Yes.
you are broadcasting from where? Are you in a church, or what is the building you're in?
I am in the hotel.
A hotel. Oh yeah. Okay. So you are kind of an organizer of Protestant churches, or maybe you're more than Protestant, but they're all Christian churches. Is that right? Doing projects that have to do with economic and social development, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, we do that. and we are concentrating, as I said, on youth, women, and girls. And also, we do try to do our best to reach the unreached people who are in the local villages and the centers.
Now, you say you're working with young people at university students. Is that the group that you also are reaching?
Yes,
And you're doing some kind of new technology. Please explain a little more about that.
but we sometimes we failed. We failed because the group of investors and the donors who were working with us, the contract has been ended by 2018. Now we are just looking for the new supporters or investors who would be interested to invest or to work with us in this kind of different project sectors which we are operating.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of technology are you trying to develop there with the young people?
There is actually Burundi is in backward in the computer science technology. There are some colleges, universities who don't have even one computer. There are also, yes, that is true. There are also the district who has the hospital, who has the secondary schools, who just don't have even one machine.
Mm-hmm.
So which means the students are only studying the technology theoretically, not practical. So,
well, that's pretty
as you
useless.
The world of today.
That's kind of useless, isn't it? To have a theoretical knowledge of computers is, if not only useless, but it would be extremely boring. Who would want to read a thing like that?
It is amazing. But of course, in the big cities, there are some universities who has, but other cities, they don't have even one. They in the hospitals, in the center, in the small towns, they don't have. As you know, the world of today is leading by technology. That is why we are just looking for supporters who can even invest in this kind of sector, and also in the agriculture farm, agriculture farm sector, because among the Burundian, which are now 12 million, 86% are depending on agriculture and farming. So, which means we have a great request, a great needs of how we can succeed just to help them to reach their goal so that they can get enough food and drink, or also in other way is to fight against hunger and ignorance.
I believe you. You say 86% of the population depends on agriculture. Is that what you said?
Yeah, 86%. They are depending on agriculture and farm.
Wow. Well, I mean, in a way, we all depend on agriculture because that's where we get all our food. But we don't have that many farmers doing the work. And I guess now, what kind of technology do the farmers in Burundi use? Do they have access to, what do? They use a hoe and they personally go around and pull up weeds, or what kind of, how are you trying to help them with improving agriculture?
In a modern system, by having the trainings first, how they can know better in the new model, because they are using the old model, which they don't, in that old model, they can't have enough food or enough success.
What is the old model would be hand labor, pulling weeds or hoeing, using a hoe to chop plants down, or what?
Yeah, exactly. They are the old one. They are using the hand map, and then they are just using the seed, which are not predictable. And now, in the sector of the Minister of Agriculture and Farming, I just contacted them. We just try to work together through agronomy and try to find out the new model, just using the new system, not the old one. Because with the old one, they failed to get enough food, enough enough harvest. That is why in the local villages, you can find there are little children, conserved mothers who are just in need of food, like in the babies, they have a lack of nutrition, they're malnutrition. So in that way, the government is interesting to have kind of people like us or other else, just to help the local communities, the local people, to train them, to show them, and to help them how they can succeed well and fight against poverty.
Do you personally go out and work with farmers yourself, or you have groups of people that go out and talk to the farmers and show them different methods of farming? What is your role?
We invite group of people from different cities, different towns, small towns or villages. And those group of people has the local associations. They are different associations which are for women, widow, and for youth. Then we invite them first to meet face to face. We just offer first a training, how they can do this and do this and do this. After that, we go on the ground to see exactly what they are doing.
So you travel around and look at farms too, and see how they're actually doing.
Yes, face to face.
And you've been trained to do agricultural trainings yourself in Finland?
Yes.
In Finland, Okay, now that's very interesting to me, because now I wonder when you say the new technology, to me, that's a very interesting question, because it's not just that there's modern technology and old technology. There are very strong differences now of ideas about how to farm in the modern way. And I am very interested in the development of new methods of farming that conserve that puts carbon back into the soil, because that is really important for developing the nutrition of the food and the sustainability of the land, but also reducing global warming for the whole planet. So I have put on several talk shows like this, conversations with people about various kinds of ideas about regenerating agriculture using various techniques such as not plowing, but planting plant seeds in the soil with little drills or little holes, and then using various kinds of mulch or various kinds of compost tea, that sort of thing, to enrich the soil, and not pulling up not turning the soil over, but leaving the carbon in the ground. This is a very, what do I want to say? The leading edge, I think, of agriculture now is to get away from industrial agriculture, where you have miles of rows and rows of farm, of plants, and where you use big, heavy equipment to with a lot of fossil fuels and compost. Well, all of those things are being introduced here, but I wonder, when you go and teach farmers in Burundi, what do you tell them to do? How do you teach them to farm?
It depends on the people, because they don't have the same level of understanding. We have some kind of materials which has enough studies concerning the agriculture and farm, but how to teach, I just invite different people, different group of peoples, depending on the knowledge, depending of the knowledge levels. Yeah, so there are who has not yet attended any school. There are who has attended the primary school. There are who has just studies secondary school. So I have to when we try to teach them, we make any different groups depending on the knowledge, so that they can better understanding.
So let's talk to Stephen Staples now. Stephen is really quite an extraordinary organizer of peace activities in Canada. Hi, Steve. How are you?
I'm terrific.
That's great.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Yeah. Okay, Steve, I should say who you are. First time I ever heard of you, you had just founded something called the Rideau Institute, and you ran this thing, and you have this publication or outreach device called Ceasefire, and it was just terrific. So you ran that for what, about 10 years, Steve? Was that about right?
Well, Rideau Institute was founded in 2006, and I was its founding president, a position I held for 8 years.
Okay, it seemed very impressive. I remember you did wonderful things. Like, I remember a story where there was a press conference at Parliament, and some minister or somebody came out in the hall and gave this big briefing, and they left the mic on. So as soon as he left, you ran over and commandeered the microphone and gave your own little speech to the world, which I thought was terrific.
Chutzpah goes a long way in Ottawa.
I remember thinking that, you actually became kind of the spokesman for the whole peace movement in Ottawa, because you had an office and you looked real and you can look convincing. So it was wonderful.
Well, that was never my intention, and I would never pretend to speak for anybody other than myself or my own organization. But during that time period, that was a hot time. You remember 2006 was an important year. We founded the Rideau Institute then, but also it was Stephen Harper's first government. It was a minority government in 2006. And in Afghanistan, where Canadian troops were stationed, we moved from a largely peacekeeping role in Kabul to a warfighting standing with Operation Enduring Freedom, and we moved to Kandahar. So it was a really important time for the peace movement and for Canada.
Yeah. Actually, I don't associate you with Stephen Harper at all. Isn't that funny? These are two different compartments in my mind. Anyway, it's good to have you back here in Toronto, where you have changed hats or something, because no, you no longer run the Rideau Institute. I guess you still have some affiliation with it, but the important thing that you're doing now is something called Peace Quest, right? And
That's
that's
right.
what I want to talk to you about today. Because I think of all the people, all the guys organizing things in Canada, you have the biggest flair for being able to make something interesting and splashy and colorful and something people want to participate in. So I hope to learn a little bit from you. You're really a master at this.
I don't know if that's true. I'd say maybe second only to this podcast, Meta.
Well, we'll see. There's a future for this, maybe. And you're going to make it into a big event because we need to know more about Peace Quest, and this is the time to talk about it. Peace Quest was at Kingston, Ontario. Give us a history of who started it and how come you inherited a thing of that kind, which I don't think you were even connected with at first, were you?
Well, I've been friends with the Peace Quest folks for many years. So you're quite right. Peace Quest was launched by an amazing group of people as a community initiative in Kingston. And really, it was the idea came in about 2012, around the centenary of the War of 1812. And you remember that we still had the Harper government at that time. And people were concerned that they were going to use the centenary as a way of kind of rewriting history and glorifying war. And they knew that 2 years later, in 2014, would be the centenary of World War I, which would be even bigger than the War of 1812. So, sorry, I guess it's not centenary; it's the bicentenary of
Oh, yes.
it was 200 years for the War of 1812 and 100 years for the anniversary of World War I. Anyway, the point being is that people wanted to say, we want to take a role in this, and we want to say, no, we don't want this just to be a glorification of war, particularly the First World War, which was terrible waste of life, for very no gain at all, warring families in Europe, all the wrong reasons, terrible experience for millions of people who were affected and were killed. So Peace Quest came about as a way to kind of counter that narrative. And it was based in Kingston, as I mentioned. There was other entities set up in Peace Quest Cape Breton, there was Peace Quest in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon, and there was a few others. And it was it had four themes. One was interfaith work, policy, the arts, and peace education. So those were the four main themes. And it ran its course, did amazing work, published books, did concerts, sponsored youth work, just did an amazing amount of work between the period of 2014 and 2018, which was the centenary of World War I. At the end, they said, well, we're kind of done. That was a great campaign, but we've built this wonderful thing, and maybe we could have somebody who would want to take it to the next stage. Now, I had been involved and I participated in their events and I had been collaborating with them. And so through a very good community-based process, I was asked to become the chairperson of sort of a new version of Peace Quest. And it's slightly different, built on the foundations, paying tribute to its history, but it's a little bit different now. And it's called Peace Quest Leadership and Education Initiative. It still has strong roots in Kingston, strong roots in the peace education world, but it's different configuration. And we're taking the work a little more broadly and exploring new areas. So I'm really excited about it.
Well, yes, because I always thought of Peace Quest as kind of a local initiative. In other words, everything it did was in Kingston. It didn't aspire to be an international movement or anything of that kind, or even a Canada-wide one. I have a much more transnational orientation. Canadians only can think as far as the boundaries of Canada go, and don't really think very much in terms of being a world leader and taking on a movement or a challenge that has to be global in scope. So, but I don't think very Canadianly. And I do have a lot of friends in other countries and I want to talk to them. So the blessing of Zoom is it doesn't matter. I mean, you could be in South Africa, you could be in Siberia, you could be in the middle of Australia.
So the effectiveness of it has yet to be determined, I think.
Compared to what though? What would you, I would wonder how to judge effectiveness anyway. But for Peace Magazine, which I have been editing for 38 years or something like that, nobody dislikes it. Nobody complains about it. How much good is it doing? I don't know. I think you, anyway, have to sort of just do it out of faith that you're doing the best you know what to do. And of course, if you get any negative feedback, you take that into account. Even this, what we're going to do today or doing today, is that going to do anybody any good in the world? I don't know. But let's do it anyway. It's fun.
Well, I tell you, I'm totally with you there. I'm not one to rule out acts. How do social movements transcend from one generation to the next? Because all of the big social movements have had to do it, whether it's slavery or women's rights or all of these things.
I don't believe in any of
What
it.
is the way?
I have a completely different take on how, and the issue, I've never been in an organization that didn't have at some point and often every day conversation about how do we get young people into our movement. As if without young people coming in, that's the end of the story. No, young people, if they're going to do anything, they'll do it on their own. They want to do their own. That's being young means trying to get away from mommy and daddy and do something independently. So movements like, you know, the climate change movements that are youth led are really youth led, and bless their hearts, go for it, kids. Terrific. If we can support you, we will, but it's yours. That's great. Let them do it. They are not interested in joining an organization full of old people. However, that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. How do we get our replenishment of members? From other old people, or other people rather who are about to become old. The best time to recruit somebody to the peace movement was they turn 65, because then they're about to retire and they're going to have lots of free time and they have lots of smarts and lots of background and lots of information still in their heads. And some of them can still run around the block. So that's the time you want to get somebody into your movement. And that's where I get all of the people who work with me. Everybody on the editorial committee of Peace Magazine has gray hair. That's because that's when they're ready to enter the peace movement again. Young people will join for maybe look around for a year or so, but they're going to go on and do something different. And then when they get to be 65, then they'll come back, or they'll come off to a different kind of organization. So I think this thing about having to say we have to pass it to the next generation or it'll die, that's nonsense. We just get the next batch of old people. There's always a funnel of old people coming through. So, you know, hang in there. In a few years, Steve, you're going to be ready for me to recruit you.
I look forward to that day.
What are you going to do with this outfit now that you own it?
Well, I don't own it. We have a board going for it. It's still very new, but I think certainly I'm interested in education aspect and seeing where peace education fits. As I look at the peace movement right now in Canada and even internationally, one thing, I don't want to create another organization or be part of another organization that's just duplicating things that other people are doing and probably doing better than I would. So what are the areas, where are the gaps right now in the peace movement? And when I talk to people, when I ask their advice, education does seem to be one of the areas where we do not have a strong presence.
Oh, good luck and good wishes for the success of Peace Quest, and we'll stay in touch. All right?
Thanks, Meta. I look forward to seeing more of your Save the World programs. You're doing great education work. You're a real inspiration.
Thanks so much, Steve. Take care. Bye.